All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are going to tackle something called walk-forward testing. This is the method that really separates the trading strategies that have a genuine edge from the ones that just got lucky looking at old data. This is how you find out if your great idea is for real. So let's start with a scenario that if you've ever tried to build a trading strategy, probably hits a little too close to home. You spend ages crafting this thing. The back test looks incredible, right? Just a beautiful, smooth line going up and to the right. You think you've cracked it. Then you switch it on with real money, and it just completely falls flat. So what happened? Here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to pull back the curtain on that perfect backtest illusion. Then, we'll introduce a much better way to do things. We'll go through the process, step by step, and really dig into why it's so effective. We'll also cover the different ways to do it, some common mistakes to avoid, and then wrap it all up. Okay, let's get right into it. Before we can talk about the solution, we have to really understand the problem. And the problem, the reason so many great-looking strategies fail, has a name. It's called curve fitting. So the big bad guy here is something called overfitting or curve fitting. Imagine you're building a strategy. You can tweak it and tune it until it perfectly explains every little wiggle and bounce in your historical data. But the problem is, you haven't just captured the market's logic. You've also captured all of its random, unrepeatable noise. Your strategy hasn't learned to trade, it's just memorized the past. And the future, as we know, is never an exact copy of the past. And this table just lays it all out, plain and simple. Think about a traditional backtest. It's like you're studying for an exam, but you have the answer key right there. You're guaranteed to get a perfect score, but did you actually learn anything? No. Walk-forward testing is totally different. It forces you to learn on one set of data and then prove you know your stuff on a completely new set. That's why the risk of overfitting plummets and the confidence you get is actually real. So if the old way is so flawed, what's the fix? Well, that brings us to a much more robust approach, walk-forward testing, or as you'll often see it, WFT. This whole method is designed from the ground up to simulate how a strategy has to perform in the real world. You know, in the simplest terms, walk-forward testing mimics what a smart trader would do naturally. You wouldn't just find one perfect set of rules and then blindly use them for the next 10 years, right? Of course not. The market changes. You'd periodically check in, see if things still work, and adapt. WFT just builds that exact process of adaptation right into the test itself. And this analogy right here is honestly the perfect way to think about it. You take a chunk of your historical data, that's the in-sample period, and you use it to study. You optimize your parameters, you find what works best. Then, you take the next chunk of data, the out-of-sample period, and that's the final exam. The data is totally new, unseen. The question is, did what you learned in your study session actually prepare you for the real test? Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's break down the mechanics of how this thing actually unfolds. It's a really clever, repeating cycle that puts your strategy through its paces. So here's how the cycle works. First, you take a block of data, let's say 2 years worth, and you optimize your strategy on it. That's your study period. Then, you lock in those best parameters and you apply them to the next 6 months of data, your exam period. You write down how it did. Then, you slide the whole window forward by 6 months and do it all over again. Repeat, until you've covered your whole data set. And here's the most important part, step 5. Your final performance report is built only from the results of those exam periods. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot more work than a simple backtest. And you're right, it is. But there's a reason we go through all this trouble. The payoff, in terms of building a truly robust strategy, is absolutely massive. It really boils down to these 3 things. First, and this is the big one, it crushes overfitting. It forces the strategy to prove itself on new data, again and again. Second, it's realistic. It simulates the process of reoptimizing your system as markets evolve. And maybe most importantly, when a strategy passes a tough walk-forward test, you gain genuine confidence. You have solid, empirical evidence that this thing might actually work, which is exactly what you need before you put real money on the line. But okay, let's say you've run the test. You stitched together all those exam periods into one final equity curve. How do you grade it? How do you know if you passed? Just looking at the final profit isn't quite enough. We need to know how well the strategy performed compared to how well we thought it would perform. And for that, there's a very specific metric. It's called walk-forward efficiency, or WFE. And it's a simple but really brilliant ratio. All it does is take the total profit from your exam periods, the out-of-sample data, and divides it by the total profit from your study periods, the in-sample optimizations. It's basically asking the question, okay, how much of that perfect, idealized performance actually survived contact with reality? So what's a good score? Well, the general rule of thumb you'll see out there is that you are looking for a walk-forward efficiency score of 70% or higher. If you can get a score like that, it's a really strong sign that your strategy is robust. It means its success isn't just a fluke, it's consistently able to translate its logic onto new, unseen data.
All right, let's talk about the practical side of things. When you actually sit down to set up one of these tests, you've got some important choices to make. And there are some really common traps you absolutely have to avoid.
So you've basically got two main flavors here. First is anchored, where your start date never changes, and your study window just gets bigger and bigger over time. The second is rolling, where you use a fixed size window, say 2 years of study, that slides forward through time, dropping the old data as it picks up new data. Now, a lot of people prefer the rolling method because it's more responsive to what the market is doing right now.
Now, this is super important. Getting your window sizes right is critical. Your in-sample period, your study time, needs to be long enough to capture a full market cycle. Your out-of-sample period, your exam, needs to be long enough for a good test, but not so long that the market has completely changed. A really common ratio to start with is somewhere between 3-to-1 and 5-to-1. So, for example, 24 months of studying for every 6-month exam. And please, whatever you do, try to avoid these common mistakes. They can completely ruin your results. Don't use too few test periods. You won't have enough data. Always include realistic transaction costs. Don't try to find the one single perfect setting in your study period. And be absolutely paranoid about making sure no future information leaks into your test data. Any one of these can give you a false sense of confidence. So let's bring it all home. After going through all of this, what's the one big idea you should walk away with? What's the core message here? This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? The whole point of this entire rigorous process is to find a strategy that has a real, adaptable edge and to separate it from a strategy that just looks good because it perfectly memorized the random noise of the past. That's the whole game. And so that's the final thought I want to leave you with. That amazing backtest you're looking at, is it the product of a truly robust, intelligent system, or is it just a historical accident? Putting it through the fire of a proper walk-forward test is the only way you're ever going to know for sure.